Early this morning, the Israeli military seized an Iranian ship carrying advanced weapons destined for Gaza. Elite troops from the Israel Navy boarded the ship in open waters on the maritime border of Sudan and Eritrea, some 1,500 kilometers south of Israel. Saudi Arabia, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain announced they are withdrawing their ambassadors to Qatar. And the foreign ministers of Russia and key Western powers begin talks in Paris to try to resolve the crisis in Ukraine while tension in the region remains high.
The news today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. Earlier today, the IDF intercepted a vessel attempting to smuggle Iranian weapons to the Gaza Strip. The operation was a culmination of months of intelligence gathering and deep preparation. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblizer has more.
A small window into the covert war being waged between Israel and Iran. On Wednesday, the IDF intercepted an Iranian shipment of advanced weaponry destined for the Gaza Strip.
While Iran is conducting these talks, smiling to the international community, it continues to arm terrorist groups, it continues to perpetrate terrorism around the world. Such an outlaw regime must not be allowed to have the means to make atomic bombs.
Several months ago, IDF intelligence identifies a weapons transfer of M302 rockets from Damascus to Tehran, a move orchestrated by Iran's elite Quds force. The missile, with a maximum range of 215 kilometers and a warhead weighing as much as 175 kilograms, would place Israel's major civilian centers at risk. The weapons are moved from Tehran to Bandar Abbas Port in southern Iran and subsequently loaded onto a civilian vessel, the KLOS-C. The ship docks in Qasr Port in Iraq, where it is loaded with additional containers with the aim of whitewashing the Iranian connection. It then heads towards Port Sudan, but is intercepted by the elite Israeli Naval Commando Unit Shayetet 13. Alternatively, the rockets would have been transferred by land through the Sinai Peninsula and into the hands of Gaza-based groups such as Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. While Iran has denied all involvement, the KLOS-C is not the first arms shipment intercepted by the IDF that had Tehran's fingerprints on it.
January 2002, the Karine A en route from Iran to Gaza is found to contain 50 tons of weapons. November 2009, 500 tons of Iranian-made arms are confiscated aboard the Frankop. March 2011, the Victoria has stopped carrying 50 tons of weaponry, including Iranian-made surface-to-sea missiles.
But Wednesday's haul is distinguished by the lethality of its cargo. The M302, in the wrong hands, would have the capacity to upset an already volatile regional balance.
And with me is Yoav Limor, military analyst for Israel Hayom and I-24 News. Good evening, Yoav.
Good evening, Lucy.
So how significant would this shipment be to the militant groups in Gaza if it arrived?
Oh, widely significant. I mean, if you give such weapons into the hand of Hamas or Islamic Jihad, enabling them to reach the range of between 100 to 200 kilometers, it means millions of Israelis are within the range of such missiles, each one carrying a warhead of about 150 kilos.
We're talking about missiles that can reach to Haifa, which is the north of Israel.
I don't know, it's about Haifa, but think of everything which is north of Tel Aviv. Hadera, Netanya, Jerusalem at large, Dimona, the nuclear reactor. I mean, it's the wettest dream of Hamas or Islamic Jihad to have such an ability. It's the dream of Iran to give Hamas and Islamic Jihad such an ability, and we see the efforts coming from Tehran. Last week I sat here, we were talking about an attack, a possible Israeli attack in Syria and Lebanon against a transfer of weaponry, advanced weaponry to Hezbollah. Now we're talking about the same thing coming from the south going to Gaza. There is an Iranian blitz which is trying to, on one hand, play nice to the West, on the other hand, they're keeping Iranians.
So do we know to which militant group in Gaza?
No, it doesn't make any much difference. I mean, it goes to all of them. Islamic Jihad obviously is much closer to Iran than Hamas, but Hamas is in smoother talks with the Iranians currently after they left Damascus. It doesn't matter. It goes into the hands of bad people in Gaza, and it might hit you, me, or anyone else in Israel.
Let's try to understand. The technology is a Chinese technology. It was made in Iran, and it was a ship. It meant to get to Gaza.
Let me correct you. The Iranians were crazy with the fact that Israel over and over again detected shipments to Gaza, and they thought they'll go in a different route. They took Syrian weaponry, and Israel detects weaponry going from Iran to Syria and to Lebanon. This transfer went from Syria to Iran the opposite way. The Iranians thought that Israel wouldn't look that way because Israel looks west. Now it went east. From Iran, it went to Iraq to try and fool everyone around. And from there, it was supposed to go to Sudan and by the land to Gaza. Obviously, the Iranians didn't want their fingerprints on that. That's why they went for Syrian weapons, and with a Panamese ship going to Sudan. They wanted to organize everything, but to stay aside.
So can we say in a certain way that the groups, the Palestinian groups in Gaza are in bed again with Tehran?
Yes, in a way they are in bed with Tehran. In a way they never left Iran's bed, like Hezbollah is in its bed or Syria in its bed. But if we look at the bigger picture, as I said before, Iran is deeply involved in terrorism in the area. It's a wild card given to Israel while Prime Minister Netanyahu is in the U.S. currently. The operation didn't take place today because he is there, but it was published today to assist him in speaking to the American, to the Western media. There are talks going on with Iran. What Israel comes and says, look, you look at the nice face of Iran. Iran is smiling at you vis-a-vis its nuclear program, but looks what's going on. Lucy, we say there is no war in Israel, but look what's going on. Every day such a war takes place. Sometimes we hear about it, most days we don't.
But I believe that maybe Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe he said to the Americans today, I told you so. Thank you very much, Yoav Limor, for this. Diplomatic tensions in the Gulf area as 3 Gulf Cooperation Council members, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, recalled their ambassadors to Qatar today, claiming Doha didn't honor a GCC deal signed on November 23rd. I-24 News reporter Roni Ben-Bassat has more.
Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates have collectively recalled their ambassadors to Qatar. The reason? The country failed to implement an agreement among the Gulf Arab countries not to interfere with each other's internal affairs. The 3 countries, all member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, along with Qatar, issued a joint statement earlier on Wednesday, saying the unprecedented move was taken in order to, quote, protect their security and stability. Qatar issued a statement of its own, saying the recall had nothing to do with the GCC agreement, but with a difference of positions on a number of issues. Tensions between Qatar and the rest of the Gulf states have increased in recent years, but this development is the clearest sign yet of a rift between it and the rest of the Gulf Arab nations. Unlike its neighbors, Qatar has denounced last year's ouster of Mohammed Morsi in Egypt and supported the Muslim Brotherhood, who has ties to Iran and is considered a threat to the stability of the Gulf countries.
We'll discuss about the matter more on the daily debate. And we're moving. And in Paris, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry held a bilateral meeting with UN Special Envoy for Syria Lakhdar Brahimi. After the talk at the ambassador's residence, both will take part in an international conference on Lebanon hosted by France at the Elysee Palace. Lebanon has been increasingly dragged into Syria's war, with Hezbollah directly supporting Bashar al-Assad's regime. World leaders gathered today in Paris to discuss the crisis in Ukraine. On the same day, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe announced it will send observers to Crimea. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira with the latest.
A week after the Crimean crisis began, a possible solution is arising.
American Secretary of State John Kerry held a meeting today with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Paris during the International Conference on Lebanon.
Today we are trying to use every diplomatic opportunity to bring Russia and Ukraine into direct contact with each other at a senior level, to make sure that the governments of Russia and Ukraine are talking to each other, which the Russians have not been prepared to do at a senior level in recent days.
The EU announced today it is ready to assist Ukraine with special aid.
The package combined could bring an overall support of at least 11 billion euros over the next couple of years from the European Union budget and European Union-based international financial institutions.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are starting to make their presence known in the conflict areas. 4 Ukrainian pilots escaped with their aircraft from a Crimean airport controlled by Russian forces, while in the city of Donetsk, police managed to evacuate pro-Russian protesters who took over the government building last Monday. The current crisis has already raised one cultural hero, Russia Today TV anchor A.B. Martin, who spoke out against the Russian invasion live on air.
Just because I work here for RT doesn't mean I don't have editorial independence. And I can't stress enough how strongly I am against any state intervention in a sovereign nation's affairs.
The state-owned network announced today they would send Martin to Crimea to get a better perspective on the issue. However, Martin declined the offer. Considering the instability in the region, no one can blame Martin for a decision to stay home.
Yes, and joining me from Moscow is On24 News correspondent Ilan Goren. Good evening, Ilan.
Good evening.
So, Ilan, it seems through the media at least that tensions seem to ease on Russian military intervention in Ukraine. Is it the same feeling in Russia?
Well, I think a lot of people are still waiting. It's extremely hard to say from here, especially since we've been hearing, developments in the last hour or two about possible Russian ships blocking Ukrainian ships in the harbor in Sebastopol. But I think most people here believe that this is part of Russia. For centuries, since the 18th century, where there was Russian presence there in the naval base, and then the Russians fought an important war and lost it against Western powers in the 19th century. The Tsars went on the summer holidays there. Most Russians are happy, for example. They're pretty glad that Prime Minister Medvedev announced that he's going to build a bridge over the water connecting Russia with Crimea, because they think it's going to be easier for them to go on their summer holidays there. For Russians, this is part of their country. They don't see this as an invasion or an incursion. They just think they get back what actually belongs to them. But on the other hand, they know there might be some pretty serious possible economic impact on them. We've seen the ruble depreciating, and that affects the prices of imported goods here in Moscow. A lot of people have to pay more for medicine, for machinery, for cars, for electrical appliances at home. And all this makes them extremely edgy. So the atmosphere in Moscow is kind of mixed. On one hand, supporting their president on this. On the other hand, worrying especially about the economic impact on their lives.
You know, Ilan, we here in Israel, we know when there is a military crisis, the popularity of the prime minister is on the rise. Is it the same with President Putin?
It is a little complicated to say because, first of all, we get reports mostly from state-sponsored pollsters. But according to the last poll that was conducted again by a pollster, an opinion polls company that is backed by the Kremlin, the president is enjoying popularity, is enjoying ratings that are higher than what he had in the last 2 years. Some people say that might be connected to the Olympics, of course, in Sochi. The Paralympics are beginning this Friday, and a lot of Russians feel proud about that and about the president's performance in this context of the Olympic Games. 67% of Russians believe that he's doing a good job. That's a much higher number than what Barack Obama gets in the USA, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. Ilan Goren, thank you very much for this. The trial for 3 Al Jazeera journalists was set to resume today in Egypt. They stand accused of aiding members of a, quote, terrorist organization referring to the Muslim Brotherhood. All 3 deny the charges, and Al Jazeera has called the accusations absurd, while human rights groups denounced it as an assault on freedom of expression. The 3 were detained in Cairo on December 29th and have remained in custody since. 6 others identified as Al Jazeera journalists are also being tried in absentia. In another sign of the ease of economic sanctions on Iran Foreign Minister Javad Zarif welcomed on Wednesday Japan's resumption of economic activities with Iran. He made the comment during a visit to Tokyo. Since the Iranian P5+1 nuclear agreement in November 2013, Japan became the first of Iran's oil buyers to make a payment to Iran and made a second payment to Iran. Today, Japan deposited $450 million in funds owed for oil imported from Iran in a Central Bank of Iran account. And joining me for a look inside Israel is I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochammer. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So let's just start. And just today, just before International Women's Day, the glass ceiling of Israeli women, the statistics of a new research are very disturbing. But before we will talk about it, Eli, let's see the report that you made.
Yes, Lucy. There is still a glass ceiling for women in senior public service positions. That's according to a new report by Israeli State Comptroller Joseph Shapira. Women are underrepresented in senior positions in hospitals, state companies, statutory entities, and universities. Shapira says public services in Israel and those who stand at its helm, who are mostly men, have failed to implement the fundamental principle of equality between the sexes. And indeed, according to official data, the situation does not look bright. The average monthly salary in 2012 was $3,140 for men, compared to $2,076 for women, meaning women earned 66.1% of the average male salary. The rate of labor force participation of women aged 15 and up was 58.2 in 2013, compared to 69.4 for men. Furthermore, throughout the workforce, men were twice as likely to become managers, 67.4% to women's 32.6%. Part of the reason for the wage gap, the report states, is that men worked an average of 44.9 hours a week compared to 35.8 hours worked by women. But wage is not the only problem. According to the Comptroller's report, the data indicates that there is a reverse ratio between the number of women in public service and women in senior management, meaning the higher the rank, the lower the percentage of women in that rank. The Comptroller added that this fact reflects the unfortunate existence of a glass ceiling.
Very disturbing, I have to say, Eli. 2014, we are both women working in Israel. This is not good news.
Not for granted.
Yes.
Yeah, so the statistics are indeed very depressing. Ironically, especially in all regarding to governmental and official positions, as we can see now on screen, among 34 general directors in government ministries, including the Prime Minister's office, Ministry of Defense, etc., there was only one woman holding this position.
Unbelievable.
And as we can see on screen now, the overwhelming discrimination extends to the Israeli police as well, to hospitals, to universities and governmental companies. And these, Lucy, are only the fields that were examined. So just imagine what's going on other fields, smaller or private. The Comptroller's conclusions are strictly unequivocal. The public service failed to establish the principle of equality in practice, and Israeli governments for decades have not formulated a clear policy about this issue. Let's hear what Israelis have to say about that.
Let's see that.
I think there is no equality between women and men in Israel. No matter for what job, they'll always pick a man rather than a woman. Women must stay at home with the children.
My wife earns more money than me. In my office, there's the same amount of women and men working under the same conditions. For me, there's no difference at all.
Women in Israel tend to be maybe more mature than ladies around the world. Being obliged to serve in the army for 2 years.
I work too. I wasn't promoted. I'm able to do many things, but they chose to take men instead. Men get promoted and us women are left aside.
If a woman wants to succeed and cares about her career, she will succeed. She can even overtake men.
Today, women earn much more money than before. But if we look at key positions, they're still occupied by men.
Well, Roy's saying that today women are earning much more than men, so...
Yeah, we should...
These are good news, I have to say.
Yes,
Elio.
but the main problem is that there is no mechanism to enforce it.
Elio Gamberg, thank you very much for this. And we're going out for a 2-minute break. The news today. Don't go anywhere. 2 minutes break, and we will be back.
This morning, the Israeli military seized an Iranian ship carrying advanced weapons destined for Gaza. Elite troops from the Israel Navy boarded the ship in open waters on the maritime border of Sudan and Eritrea, some 1,500 kilometers south of Israel. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain announced they are withdrawing their ambassadors to Qatar. And the foreign ministers of Russia and key Western powers begin talks in Paris to try to resolve the crisis in Ukraine while tension in the region remains high. Welcome back to the news today. The IDF stopped a Hezbollah plot today to plant a bomb on the Israel-Syria border. It marks the latest escalation, jeopardizing the relative quiet in the north. I-24 News correspondent Giles Bubitzer reports.
Hezbollah had vowed to retaliate, but on Wednesday, the Lebanese militant group was stopped in its tracks.
2 Hezbollah-affiliated terrorists were identified attempting to plant an explosive device near the Israel-Syria border. IDF forces responded immediately and fired toward the suspects. Hits were identified.
Last week, Hezbollah accused Israel of conducting an airstrike within Lebanon, targeting, according to reports, either a missile site or a weapons convoy from Syria.
The new aggression is a blatant assault on Lebanon and its sovereignty. The resistance will choose the time and place and the proper way to respond to it.
Wednesday's incident may have otherwise constituted such a response. The IDF believes the operatives were planning to detonate the explosive device on a passing patrol unit. Israel has repeatedly promised to prevent Hezbollah from obtaining game-changing weapons, and the IDF is believed to have previously destroyed advanced Russian and Iranian-made arms bound for the group. On Saturday, Hezbollah launched 2 Katyusha rockets at an Israeli military outpost in the Golan Heights, which landed in open areas. As tensions rise, the relative quiet that has persisted on Israel's northern front since the end of the 2006 war with Hezbollah is becoming increasingly precarious.
And Netanyahu's speech to the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference on Tuesday sparked a furious reaction from the Palestinian Authority. In his speech, Netanyahu called on the Palestinians to stop denying history regarding Israel's historic biblical connection to the land and to acknowledge Israel's right to exist as a nation-state of the Jewish people. Palestinian Authority senior official Nabil Shat called it an official announcement of a unilateral end to negotiations. And joining me right now via telephone is Ahmed Ghanem, senior Fatah official. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, came as a surprise for you, this reaction from the Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Look, I had listened carefully to the speech of Netanyahu. I believe this is a self-confident organs speech, and he ignoring all the wills to continue the peace process by a fair way. This is a unilateral stop of the negotiation by the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He ignored the need for the Palestinian people to have and the Palestinian state to have its own sovereignty in all of its land. If he is not talking about the boundaries, about Jerusalem, or rejected to talk about land boundaries and Jerusalem refugees, what he left for the negotiation?
Mr. Ghanem, is it a tactic from the Palestinian side to maybe stop the negotiation?
No, we always say we are committed to the peace process, and we will continue the schedule of the peace process till the end of next month, April, to the end of April, and then we will see the outcome of this peace process.
Yes,
if
Ahmed.
If there is a serious outcome, we will think about that, about the future.
Mr. Ahmed Ghanem, thank you very much for this phone call with us. And we're moving on. On the anniversary of the death of former Venezuelan strongman Hugo Chavez, anti-government protests continue to cause violence, unrest across the country. Just the latest challenge to President Nicolas Maduro. More in the next report.
Hugo Chavez is still very much present in today's Venezuela, on billboards and murals across the country, and in the memory of the poor who benefited most from his left-wing programs. A memory that his successor, Nicolás Maduro, is having a hard time living up to, despite following in Chavez's footsteps and mimicking his strong rhetoric style.
I think he tries to imitate him, but he can't.
Chronic shortages of basic goods, a 56% inflation rate, and rampant crime have driven Venezuela's middle class to the streets in recent weeks in protests that have often turned violent. Long queues at supermarkets are nothing new. They existed under Chavez too, but his supporters say his charisma and character made difficult times bearable.
It's hard to believe, but he had the talent of persuasion, and it's not the same with the president we have now.
While Maduro doesn't command the same unquestioning loyalty, many Chavistas in working-class neighborhoods say they will continue to support him, but under certain conditions.
As long as Maduro keeps on with Chavez's legacy, I think people will be happy and satisfied. If he doesn't, he won't go very far.
But some analysts point to Maduro's razor-thin presidential victory last year as a sign of eroding support.
Once Chavez died, Maduro's appeal in the working-class neighborhoods is less than what Chavez had.
While protests rip through other areas of Caracas, Chavez's imposing figure still casts a long enough shadow in these working-class neighborhoods to ensure that his legacy and appointed successor can continue for now.
And joining me is the host of I-24 News Economy Magazine, Benjamin Chong Alfares. Hello, good evening.
Hello to you.
So we saw Hugo Chavez is an admired leader.
Indeed.
He was an admired leader.
Very popular.
And how come the poor people in Venezuela, they don't see him as the one to blame for their situation?
First of all, Venezuela is a very special kind of situation. On the one hand, it's a country that is blessed with tremendous natural resources. You know, oil up the wazoo. They're the fifth biggest oil exporter, essentially, within OPEC. Water, giving them essentially hydroelectricity, you know, for all their currently state-owned factories and such. They have really amazing blessings. At the same time, the Venezuelan people, there's always been a very large contingent of people who have been living in poverty. Not always, but certainly for most of the 20th century. Yes. Now comes along Chavez, who himself comes from those people, and after years of crisis, basically takes the helm and says, you know what, we're going to change things around. We're going to take oil like that has basically made our country rich and give it to the people. Now, what's the problem? Your average person doesn't necessarily see how mismanagement of the economic policies are ultimately affecting them. Even though the money is redistributed, because of his policies, he is essentially causing others who are investing in the country to go away.
So if we're looking at Nicolas Maduro, to what extent is he free to lead Venezuela economically?
I mean, Nicolas Maduro basically is living in Chavez's shadow in many, many ways. He inherited the difficult economic situation from Chavez that Chavez left behind in his legacy.
A good legacy, yeah.
Indeed. But at the same time, he's not really doing anything to change it. He's doing more of the same. And Chavez was not the first to introduce these populist policies. I mean, other leaders before him tried, at, in a more limited fashion. Price controls. It's nothing new. Chavez did that. Was not the first to do that. But Nicolas Maduro essentially is taking the same ideas and not coming up with anything new and letting things go on the way
So what
they
is the
have
current
been.
situation in Venezuela?
The current situation is actually very bad. Why is it bad? It's bad because it's essentially a status quo that can just continue rolling on.
Yes.
It's not too bad where the people will take to the street and they
So we
will
can't-
really change things dramatically.
Basically, we can say that Nicolas Maduro has a lot of job and a lot of work to.
Yes, a tremendous job
Thank
ahead of him.
you
Yes, indeed.
very much, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Today, India's Election Commission announced the dates of the country's next election, beginning in April and ending in May. 814 million Indian citizens will be eligible to vote, making the election the largest the world has ever seen. I-24 News reporter Roni Bembassa takes a look.
It's only fitting that the biggest democracy in the world would hold the biggest election. In a period of 5 weeks, beginning on April 7th, India will embark on 9 rounds of polling to elect a new Lok Sabha, or lower house.
In 9 poll days, we will be covering 543 parliamentary constituencies and respective assembly constituencies.
Wednesday's official announcement kicked off a race between the ruling Congress Party and its main opposition, the BJP. But it is really the battle of the elite against the common man. Taking the place of incumbent Prime Minister Manmohan Singh as leader of the left-wing Congress Party is the Harvard and Cambridge-educated Rahul Gandhi. Raised in New Delhi, the 43-year-old comes from a long dynasty of prime ministers and is the great-grandson of the country's first prime minister, Nehru. But his party faces voter discontent over a string of corruption scandals and a sharply slowing economy. Gandhi's main opponent, 63-year-old Narendra Modi, grew up in a small village and is the son of a tea stall seller. The charismatic Hindu nationalist hardliner has emerged as a frontrunner in the race and is currently tipped to win according to opinion polls. The next government will face formidable challenges, both in the economic and the diplomatic front. With the country's economy increasing too slowly and the region entering a crucial era as NATO forces withdraw from Afghanistan later this year.
And joining me is I-24 News tech correspondent Shai Ringel. Good evening. Thank you for coming to the studio. So, Apple launched CarPlay. Can you explain to me what is CarPlay?
It's basically Siri in your car.
Siri is actually talking with me in my car. Okay.
Apple really want you to interact with them even when you're driving and not looking into your car. So they want you to talk to your car. They manage a several partnership with Volvo and Lamborghini in order to make cars that already have the iPhone inside them, so you can talk while you're driving. And a really interesting thing is that it scans your schedule and your emails. So when you go inside your car, it already know where you're going and when, and
so
can tell you, okay, you can drive.
Siri can actually tell me, Lucy, you are going next to.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You don't even need to push a button. It just says, okay, you have a meeting.
The fact that I'm saying she and not it, it's already very disturbing.
Yes.
So we're moving to Facebook. Facebook is trying to buy Titan Aerospace, which is a drone company. Yeah. Try to explain to me why.
That's a really interesting story because we usually don't think about Facebook trying to
military
fly all over the world. And Titan Aerospace is a really interesting company because they built drones that can fly for over 5 days without landing. And the idea is to try to push internet into developing countries that don't have the constructions they need in order to get fast internet. Google already have a program like that. It's called Loon project.
Yes.
And Facebook wants to do the same. They joined a coalition called Internet.org that wants to bring internet to developing countries. They wanna African people to open Facebook.
Okay, but you know, Shai, I wonder what conspiracy theories are going to come out right now after this note. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
new Japanese feature on Fukushima takes place for the first time in Fukushima, telling the story of one of the many families forced to leave their homes following one of the world's worst nuclear disasters. Here's more from our I-24 News culture correspondent, Jaffa Port.
Homeland is no longer just the name of a famous American TV series, but also the emotionally charged title of Japan's first ever mass-market movie set in Fukushima. 3 years after the world's worst nuclear crisis since Chernobyl, which forced more than 160,000 people from their homes, director Nao Kubota decided to go back and tell their story.
I wanted to stop the situation fading from our minds. I wanted to make a film that would be relevant for a long time to come, that people could watch in 10, 20, 50 or even 100 years and see that this sort of catastrophic situation came about.
On March 11, 2011, a massive offshore earthquake and tsunami killed over 19,000 people and set off meltdowns at the Fukushima nuclear plant, forcing the government to declare it an off-limits exclusion zone due to high radiation levels. The new film centers on a young man whose family fled their ancestral farm in the area as he secretly decides to move back into the nuclear off-limits zone. The production, taking place for the first time in this no-man's land, re-triggered widespread debate in the country about whether the reactors should be restarted or scrapped for good. But cast and crew members chose to remain neutral on the matter.
The movie is neither positive nor negative about nuclear power. And as an individual, I don't think I should comment on whether the film made me think it's a bad thing or not. Personally, I'm not really thinking about it at all.
But Kubota's Homeland, however subtle its message, has managed to strike a nerve with at least some viewers.
It made me remember that nothing's really solved, despite the fact that politics is moving on. Our Prime Minister is plugging nuclear power as though nothing happened in Fukushima. The movie made me feel that there's something wrong with that.
Fukushima's fate remains unknown, as experts expect the cleanup process to take decades. Meanwhile, Japan's rural families, who lost both health and property in the disaster, have received a new voice.
And joining me for more on the stories, I-24 News culture correspondent Shahal Peled. Good evening.
Hi, Lucy.
So, Shahal, how come it took 3 years to film in Fukushima?
Well, it was a very tragic story, and it remains to be one. Thousands of families still haven't returned to their homes. And since this film doesn't try to present any answers, I think this is what made it actually happen and actually be created. Its director says it is a timeless story of one family, and I think taking this direction is what made it successful. The issue of nuclear Japan is still very, very sensitive in the country. It's very touchy, and regardless, film revenues are dropping. So filmmakers don't want to deal with this issue, with such a heavy and sensitive issue in Japan. There were past attempts. Only last December there was a small independent film called The House of the Rising Sun, but it was in much smaller scale, not to the bigger audiences in Japan, and it didn't take place in Fukushima itself. It was about the story, but I'm guessing the crew didn't want to take any risks like this one. Yes. And there was a film in 2012, an attempt at least, called Land of Hope, where the director couldn't find any funding in Japan. His Japan-based investors didn't want to take part in it because it was a taboo too far for them. So it is an unprecedented film 3 years later, and hopefully it will be successful as well.
And if we're going just neighboring Japan, in Thailand, something completely else.
Completely different, going to the political side, actually. We're staying in the Far East, and in Thailand, a new funny, sarcastic satire show is now broadcast. It's only on the web, but it's already very viral, very popular, over 250,000 hits on each episode. It's called Shallow News in Depth. And
how's it called?
Shallow News in Depth.
Okay.
And it's making fun of the traditional news in Thailand, much like similar shows in the UK and the US. Actually, one of its hosts is referred to as Jon Stewart on crack. But it is unprecedented in Thailand because it's a country which is ranked 130 out of 180 countries in freedom of press. It's even below South Sudan and Afghanistan. There are very strict laws about not making any criticism about the monarchy. So they are saying they are independent, an an independent production and they can do whatever they want. They haven't been criticizing the royal family yet. They're focusing mainly on the clashes, the political clashes in the past months. No, they're saying so far no repercussions. They have been receiving some phone calls, but nothing to be too anxious about. They're mainly making fun of both sides, the anti and pro-government protesters in Thailand, making fun of what they're saying, what they're wearing. There's the red and yellow shirt, so they're making great jokes about it. People love them because they are taking both sides and making fun of them.
Trying to be
Thailand
objective,
needs that, I guess.
Yes, I'm trying to be objective, but Jon Stewart on crack? Really?
That's what you get
We're
in
still,
Thailand.
but we're still staying with your voice because we're going to Israeli actress Ayelet Zorer, who you just met, has already landed small roles in big international films, but she still finds time to be a mom, represent a fashion brand, and continue pursuing a global acting career. Our I-24 News cultural correspondent Shachal Peled sat down for a talk with a busy performer.
It was a good year for Ayelet Zorer, a household name in Israel who has become an international movie star. From portraying Superman's mother in the blockbuster Man of Steel, through leading roles in the internationally adapted TV shows In Treatment and Hostages, to starring in an upcoming action film with Clive Owen and Morgan Freeman. She's been so busy that she missed the acceptance of a Best Dramatic Actress Award of 2013 in Israeli television, which she was finally presented this week during a short visit to Israel.
It's a blessing. First of all, these specific roles are probably one of the best roles in my career, so I'm really happy about them, and I enjoyed working on them. And to be able to be in them while they're transcend to other countries is remarkable.
But working simultaneously in 3 different continents isn't an easy task for a family woman.
I had to leave the set, come home, take a shower, be with my son, and jump on a plane to come here, to work here 48 hours, go back home, be 1 day at home, be with my son, and go back to work for 3 days.
In the past 3 years, Zorer has combined her acting career with one in modeling, representing Israeli brand Golbery. She is now filming her latest Hollywood project, Rodrigo Garcia's indie drama Last Days in the Desert, starring Ewan McGregor, in which Zorer will portray McGregor's mother.
This particular movie is really small in the scale. It's a deep story about the relationship between sons and fathers, and between people and the effect that people have on each other by choice.
This will be her second collaboration with McGregor. In 2009, they worked together on the adaptation of the best-selling book Angels and Demons, where Zorer landed the lead female role alongside Tom Hanks.
I think as an actor, Tom Hanks is one of my favorite people on earth. He's still a friend, and I think he is a remarkable human being, very smart, but also wise.
Although she is likely still far from her peak on the international stage, it seems Zorer is already light years away from those first baby steps in Hollywood, which she owes to one iconic director.
Steven Spielberg is also one of the people I admire most. I really take to heart people who I think are capable of being successful but keeping something so human within the life they chose, and it's hard, it's challenging, you know.
And he opened the door for you.
And Stephen opened the door for me, exactly, so I owe him till the end of the day, or to the end of my career.
A model, an actress, a mom, who says that we can do it all? And I mean women. We can do it all. This is a girl power. Good for her. We're going out for a 4 minutes break, and then we will be back for the I-24 News Daily Debate. The news today, 4 minutes, and I'll be back.